Welcome to episode 1 of Helping Forests Walk. I'm Connie Barlow and today is June 6, 2021. I'm standing here in Highland Cemetery near Ypsilanti, Michigan. This is my home for the last stage of my life. This is southern Michigan. None of my ancestors are buried here, but I do have 5 generations before me in southern Michigan. The previous 2, my father and grandfather in the Detroit area, as we are here, and 3 before that, over in Hastings and Coldwater, Michigan. That's the southwestern part of the state. Now, 5 generations before mine, yes, the Barlow side of my heritage is colonizing heritage here in North America, and I acknowledge that. The main Native group that I'm becoming familiar with their history and their contributions is the Potawatomi. And the Potawatomi were mostly over in southwestern Michigan, but they've been here for millennia, and they've tended the lands for millennia. And they were moved out forcibly to, most of them, to Kansas and then Oklahoma. One of those who was moved to Oklahoma, her grandfather, or maybe its great-great-grandfather, was moved to Kansas. And she's Potawatomi, and she's the reason I'm calling this series Helping Forests Walk. That's Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's a botanist. She's now living in Haudenosaunee territory over in Syracuse at State University of New York in Syracuse. She's the author of Braiding Sweetgrass and one of the principal spokespeople for how a Western scientific view, her training in botany, and the indigenous traditional ecological knowledge and ways of observing change and interpreting what needs to be done, that's part of her heritage too. So in this series, this is the first one I'll be having here, this is an introduction to the series, and what you're going to see a lot of in here is natural history, observations, and what that, as a bridge between the indigenous ways of knowing and the highly technological, quantified ways of knowing it's scientific, modern scientific, how it's done in universities now. Natural history, such as Darwin did, such as my mentor, Paul S. Martin, the great Pleistocene ecologist, did. Natural history might be the bridge that can help both sides work together. That's what this series will be about, Helping Forests Walk. One of the episodes that I'll surely be doing has to do with this genus. Genus Taxus. This is the yew family, and take a look at how huge this tree is here. This happens to be the European yew. This is the kind of yew that was planted in cemeteries, and in fact, right outside the house we're staying in now in Ypsilanti. This is the kind, it's the European yew, Taxus baccata. And with this gravestone, or this head of the family, there's several graves here, and I've seen that the oldest one, there was a death at 1912. These 2 trees were probably little shrubs when they were planted in 1912, which means they're over a century old. Now, in the wild, I'm probably in Europe, certainly here in eastern North America, we do have a species of yew here, but it never grows like this. This yew of any species could not be planted here anew, because what's changed since a century ago is there are deer all over the place. When I was a little kid growing up in Detroit, we had to drive 3 hours to maybe see deer in the morning. And now, here they are living in the nearby woods. Deer they love you, especially in the wintertime. And so these trees grew before the deer were here again. The colonizers, my ancestors, had completely depopulated the deer here. And then by the time they were tall enough and the deer came back, the deer now eat everything that comes out low, but nothing up here. So I'm going to be doing an episode about this because when my husband and I were living on the road for 18 years, I had a chance in several places along the west coast of the United States to film wild Pacific yew in its forest context. And here in the east, it's harder to find the native Canadian yew, but I did get some filming of that in. And now that I'm in communication with scientists working on genus taxus yew, both in Europe and especially in China, I think the video I took could offer ideas to them about how best to restore this species, extend its range. They've contracted tremendously. And I think there are hints in the video I took in the wilds here in America without knowing how it might serve. So that will definitely be one of the episodes in this series. So let us remember the ancestors of our own species, of trees, and let us think of the descendants who may or may not have an opportunity to follow us, follow them, as we begin episode 1 of Helping Forests Walk. Episode 1 is a remix with updates of a talk I gave 7 years earlier at a bookstore in Prescott, Arizona. It begins with a preview. Do you see the amount of science and natural history that needs to be done in order for us to do a responsible job? And what happens when we no longer when we're no longer wealthy? When we no longer can just jump in in a four-wheel drive and go somewhere and carry some seeds? What happens when we're all desperate for something? Who's going to take care of the trees? Who is going to take care of the trees? The presentation in Prescott, Arizona, 2014 begins.
Good evening. I'm Walt Anderson from Prescott College, and it's my honor tonight to introduce the guest speaker, Connie Barlow. I came across Connie Barlow's writings many years ago and was very impressed. She is a fine science writer and evolutionary biologist. I have a book of essays that she edited on Gaia, the Gaia hypothesis, and really a wonderfully well-balanced book that I really love. But then she got into other things like rewilding, reintroducing some of the missing Pleistocene megafauna, the anachronisms of nature where evolutionary linkages have been broken, and she's continued to work with evolutionary linkages in many ways. I think that's what she's going to speak about tonight, about assisted migration or assisted range expansion or whatever we want to call it, because things are changing, and climate change is one of the most dramatic things that we're all been experiencing, and we're experiencing change on an unprecedented rate. Carl Tomoff sitting back there can tell you how the birds have changed over the last 30, 40 years, something. I'm not sure how long he's been observing the birds here, but for a long time, and they're a real dramatic canary in the coal mine in a sense of telling us what's changing. It's really dramatic, the changes, and the same with plants and other things like that. And so I think she has a wonderful message to give us tonight, and I'm sure you'll have lots of questions. And thank you to the Berrigan Book Company for hosting this event. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Connie. Thank you.
Thank you, Walt. Well, it's so wonderful to be here and spending a number of days, and I'd like to mention that Reverend Jackie Ziegler here sitting in the front is the reason we are here, Michael Dowd and I. She brought us into the Granite Peak Unitarian Universalist Church and then helped me network with Prescott College, which for me, I have never visited. I've seen from afar, but has always intrigued me because of how many amazing people chart their lineage to Prescott College. I've written 4 books. The first one that Walt mentioned, that was published in 1991. And what I'm doing now is
Climate March.
Okay, Climate March. I don't advertise, I don't wear t-shirts, but this year I am. For Michael and me, this is our year to do whatever we can to make a difference in moving this country into recognizing climate change is real, It has impacts in our lives now and will ripple out into the future, and that systemic action must be taken. Not just becoming good individuals and having low flush toilets, but we need systemic action, and that requires us working as a group.
Amen.
Amen. So what this is this is the route of the marchers, and Michael and I are presenting along the route of the marchers, which began in Los Angeles March 1st and will end in Washington, D.C. on November 1st. And by golly, those marchers are keeping to schedule. One stay day that used to call the rest day. It's not a rest day, it's when they do their laundry and all that. Stay day a week. And they walk anywhere from 13 to 19 miles a day. Days through the Mojave Desert with no shade. There was a hike that Jackie's church helped sponsor and get together, and that Walt Anderson led and Doug Holmes, both faculty at the college, helped with, and I was part of as well, that went up to the champion alligator juniper tree that for the last nearly 9 months has also been a memorial to 19 amazing young men. So the reason I am here, I've written 4 books beginning in 1991. My most recent one was in 2001. The person who wrote a foreword to it was a longtime University of Arizona professor down in Tucson. Did any of you ever know or know of Paul S. Martin? Okay, several. I would not be doing the climate action I'm doing now had it not been for his mentorship. He died 4 years ago. But what Paul Martin gave me was the ability to walk into a landscape, and I may not know what all the species are, but I am looking with deep time eyes. And that is, I'm looking to how this landscape has been affected by the changes that have happened in the Pleistocene and the Holocene and during my own life, the changes that have come. And when you see a landscape through deep time eyes, you see it completely differently from the way you would see it just from an ecological standpoint, just from a single taxon standpoint. And it's both a blessing and a curse, because you can mourn for more of the losses, but you can also see the opportunities that are there as well. So the reason I'm standing here is because Paul Martin and I co-authored a paper that was in the last issue of Wild Earth magazine. How many of you know Wild Earth magazine ever? Okay, I see some smiles. And Paul Martin and I co-authored an article that said, "Move Torreya taxifolia north now." This is where it all began. I could not have done it without his mentorship, because Paul had incredible stature. He is a great Pleistocene ecologist. He was the one who, working with Dan Jansen in 1982, published a paper in Science that my whole 2001 book, Ghosts of Evolution, was about. That there was megafauna here in the Americas, and certainly in Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. But here in the Americas, concentrating on that, ground sloths, camels, and the predators, and the mastodons, and the mammoths, and so forth. And the loss of those megafauna had an effect on the landscape, and had an effect on individual plants that for tens of thousands and even tens of millions of years, in some cases, had co-evolved with megafauna, shifting group of megafauna through time. And what the megafauna, the herbivores, did was they were capable of eating a certain kind of fruit that we might enjoy eating, but we spit out the seeds. We're not going to swallow those seeds. Megafauna, big elephants, Shasta ground sloth around here, they just take it in, smash a little on their palate, swallow it, poop out the seeds. And from the plant's perspective, poop out the seeds, hopefully quite a few hundreds of yards, maybe miles from where they got that fruit. And here's the thing. Those fruits are now called ecological anachronisms because they're not fully fit to have a full reproductive function. There's a lot of energy going into creating all that extra. Let me give an example. Certainly around here. How many of you have seen Joshua Tree out in the Mojave Desert? Okay, have any of you seen, it's very rare that it actually does fruit, but the fruits are kind of like plantain bananas on it. Yeah. And actually, it's a member of the yucca genus. And so the Native Americans, that and banana yucca, they found ways to process and actually use the carbs in it, but there were seeds buried within it, and those seeds were dispersed. And while I was with Paul Martin on a number of occasions, he allowed me, he had in his own house, I could touch, he had a fossil dung ball of a Shasta ground sloth discovered in some cave in Arizona that I could touch. I mean, this is a mystical
It's holy
experience.
shit.
It's holy shit! But you could see how rough the fibers were in it, even rougher than a horseshoe. And you could actually see seeds in it. And so for a long time, even before Paul, people looking at the shit of Shasta ground sloth knew that this ground sloth not only ate the fruit, but ate a lot of the needle leaves on it as well. So what Paul Martin did was said, you know, when you're looking at a landscape, you can't just look at the rodents now, trying to get those pods and not able to get them off of a Joshua tree, waiting for them to fall 2 years later, and then harvesting the seeds and eating them or moving them 20 feet to the scatterboard. Yeah. That's not what Joshua Tree has had up until the last 11,000 years since the death of the megafauna. But what happens when climate starts changing really fast? Really fast. What I'd like to do here is to take you through a worldview transition. Feel free to resist it. It's a horrible perception to go through, but we're all grown-ups here. We can handle it. It's very sad, but I want you to take a look at the chart that you've got right there. If you looked at it earlier, you see IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Some of you may have heard that March 31st, Working Group 2 came out with a revised version of its impacts, adaptation. That's what it always does, and every 5 to 7 years it'll update that. But it takes the results of Working Group 1, which is what are the possibilities for climate change, takes the result of Working Group 1 and says, okay, what are our choices? What does this mean? What does this really mean for what it's going to be like to be a human trying to live our own lives? And more than that, a human who cares about other species. What's it going to be like? And so take a look at the chart. And what you see on the vertical axis on the left side is maximum speed at which species can move, kilometers per decade. And on the right vertical axis, you have different well-accepted climate change computer modeling scenarios, the kind of stuff that Working Group 1, physical science, comes up with, okay? So Working Group 2 on impacts works with the science produced by Working Group 1, who updated their view in September of 2013. And now, what you see with the little icons there, the higher the bar, the taller the bar, the better off that type of life form is going to be in keeping pace with how fast climate zones are moving north or uphill, up mountains. Around here, you're concerned, and in the Sky Islands would really be uphill. I'm mostly an Easterner, so flatlands in the east, it's mostly how fast you have to move north, which is a heck of a lot faster than you have to move uphill. But at least you've got more land area to the north. You all, at some point, the range shrinks and shrinks and shrinks as you go up that mountain, and pretty soon, you know, everybody's standing on the boulder at the top, and that's it. So it's different problems. This diagram is really important to me because for the first time, anyone can look at this. And this was in the summary report, just the 44-page summary report for policymakers. There's hundreds of other pages in this working group thing, but this was so important they included it in the summary report. And what kind of life form do you see is going to have the greatest problem to keep pace with climate change? Trees. Now we all know that endangered species and little reserves, right? You know, the Nature Conservancy that went for decades thinking they could protect this plant and that plant by having this cute little reserve. And with climate change they go, oh no. We all know endangered species are going to have real problems, especially if there's no corridors to connect one reserve with another. Big movement, especially here in the Southwest, for making those corridors. That's really great for creatures that can move, especially that have 4 legs. You don't need them for wings, but for 4 legs, really great. But what if you got roots? What are you going to do? And what if those little scatter-hoarding rodents are able to move you, let's say, 20 meters max, and your little babies there, the little seeds, some years they can grow, some years they don't have enough rain. So maybe only once every 10 years a seed can actually make it. Okay, and then it's got to wait 30 to 40 years to get tall enough to make some more seeds. Oh, and then you get to go another 20 meters. You see what's going to happen? Nobody's worried about Joshua Tree right now. It's not endangered.
October 2020 update. In a huge victory, California's Joshua Tree becomes the first plant protected due to climate change. And that's because of the tremendous fire that happened in the core of Joshua Tree habitat in Mojave Preserve just 2 months earlier, August 2020. The listing as endangered for Joshua Tree was by the state government of California, not the federal government, and it was temporary. So we'll see if that holds.
But if you look at the paleoecological range, which is something that I do, you see that at the end of the Pleistocene, its range came about as far north as it does now, southern Nevada, a little bit into, Arizona and Utah, but it went all the way down to Mexico, and it's lost that range. So in the warming since the Pleistocene, and the Shasta ground sloth went extinct very soon after the Pleistocene was over, after the warming really began, it hasn't been able to move the southern part of it north. It's just contracted its range. It's lost the range, hasn't moved much north. And so we're all sitting here going, la, 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 la. Aren't those Joshua trees beautiful? Uh-oh, bad place to put Joshua Tree National Park. They should have, Mojave National Reserve, they should have called that Joshua Tree. Or something else, in Las Vegas or something. And so they're getting worried because just like, what's going to happen at Glacier National Park within 30 years? No glaciers. No glaciers. I worked there in Glacier National Park the summer of '71. And I look at how this one glacier, Jackson, I'd gone all the way up and over, and I look at it now, and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe how much it shrunk.
I was fortunate that during my college summers, I was able to work in national parks, including Yellowstone and Glacier. Now, while in Glacier National Park in 1971, one of the highlights was hiking up Jackson Glacier, which is pictured here. Now, this is a picture taken in 2009, and it's a very different glacier from the glacier I walked up in 1971. The glacier was much more extensive when I was there. In fact, on this particular rock ledge, we were able to walk right onto the white surface of the ice, and from there hike all the way up on ice, not rock, on ice, up to the ridge, and then from there down the other forested side to Lake McDonald Lodge.
Glacier National Park is going to lose its namesake, Joshua Tree National Park. That's why some of journalists have called Joshua Tree the poster plant of climate change for the American West. It's got a lot of press that way. There's no need to get really worried about it quite yet. Ken Cole at Flagstaff, Northern Arizona University, put out in 2011 a range map based on climate models and just using the computer of where it's going to wink out of within 30 to 60 years in red. And that's basically almost everywhere it is now. There's a few places it's going to make it. And then he's got another color for where it's going to need to be. We're talking way up into Utah and a lot of places in Arizona. How is it going to get there? Well, let's see, maybe it can move a quarter mile if it's lucky. I mean, we're talking like 150 miles. How is it going to get there? Now that's Joshua Tree, okay? All right, so one tree, okay, we can handle that, we can handle that. And endangered species, we can handle that. What we're talking about here is what the IPCC report calls assisted species migration, okay? This is where assisted humans would be assisting Joshua Tree to move north. I'm concerned that it gets started now because we don't know whether some of the Joshua trees in the southernmost part of the range, let's say Joshua Tree National Park, might have genotypes that are possibly more warm or dry adapted than some of the ones you might find on the Joshua Tree Forest Parkway here in Arizona that you all are so proud of. I don't know. But the point is you don't want genotypes to wink out. And so in my view, if I lived in Arizona, I would do what I have already done because I'm an Easterner. Our group of citizen naturalists moved the first intentional assisted migration of a tree endangered by climate change. We were the first to do it. We got a lot of press on it. And I was called an eco-terrorist. Because, what do we all know? What have we been learning as good citizens for the last 30, 40 years? Invasive species. And that's what everyone says. Well, how do you know it won't be invasive? If you have deep time eyes, you see how much everything has been moving north-south, especially in the east. North-south during the waxing and waning of the glaciers. And you see how individual species made their way back north, not as a whole intact community, but opportunistically. And many of them thanks to passenger pigeons. What's going to happen now? No passenger pigeons. You guys lost the Shasta ground sloth. We lost the passenger pigeon back there. So what we're talking about now is something that it's just like climate denial. I imagine anyone here is not in climate denial. Okay, so you've gone through that one. That's a tough one. I'm going to give you the next one. I believe I've lived through the transition of where the Anthropocene now no longer be denied. The Anthropocene, I feel I'm standing on one side and the other of the divide. And that's because I felt in the past that nature could take care of itself except for endangered species and where we screwed things up with habitat and overhunting and bush meat and pollution and DDT, all that regular stuff that we've been dealing with forever with the 6 major extinction, Norman Myers pointing out to us in the late 70s. Okay, we've all known about that. But really, I mean, American beech trees are down in northern Florida. I've seen them there. And they're also up just south of the Canadian Shield. Okay? Same species, American beech tree there, all right? I never thought anything about that. But even the American beech, even the common trees that are not windblown. Yesterday and the day before, I'm out there. And Siberian elm seeds blowing all over the place. Cottonwood plumes blowing all over the place. Okay, they're not going to need our help. They're going to make it. Anything windblown is going to have its seeds make it. Juniper, yes, its pollen is all over the place, but what matters is its seeds. Okay? Juniper is going to need help.
Oaks are going to need help. Joshua Tree obviously is going to need help. Are we prepared to think that about nature? Are we going to get out there and have to garden it all? Florida Torreya, our Torreya taxifolia, this yew family conifer tree, hadn't reproduced since I was about 12 years old. Fortunately, it kept coming up from suckers and dying back and coming up. But you know, it was no exotic species that was knocking it out. Kind of like the same thing going on with your pine beetles and ips and all that here. Those are native beetles you all are dealing with. But the climate is wrong for it now, them now. The climate is wrong. Florida Torreya, our Torreya taxifolia, is one of the first plants designated for the Endangered Species Act. It's had an endangered species management plan, all kinds of scientists with whom I've interacted. And at one point, I just got fed up with them. They kept trying to solve the problem by making native range, 1491 native range, okay, sacrosanct over biodiversity, with fears of invasive species. And so our group found some loopholes in the Endangered Species Act. I don't need to go into the details, but we found loopholes. And in 2008, we performed the first assisted migration of this tree. This is Torreya taxifolia, yew family. And I'll also pass around the seed. I have 200 seeds with me now because we've got some more people who want to do planting of this Florida species in Ohio. Not because we necessarily think they're going to survive there, but we're doing an experiment. This tree never made it out of its peak glacial refuge. Down in Florida, this little tiny range was where everything hung out when all the glaciers were covering Michigan and Pennsylvania and part of New York. That's where everything was hanging out, and nobody took this seed back north. It couldn't make it through the sand flats and into the southern Appalachians. So it's grown fine in the southern Appalachians, producing seed there. We want to know where the northern range is. We want to know where the northern limits are now. It's been lagging behind in climate. And we're hoping that we're going to find a place. I just sent 40 to a guy in southern New Hampshire. I'm hoping he's going to be the place where these things aren't going to make it. So we'll go, whew. All right, we know it's not as far as New Hampshire. You all have no idea how far north your Joshua tree can grow. You have no idea what its northern range is right now with this climate, because it hasn't been able to move for 11,000 years. Do you see the amount of science and natural history that needs to be done in order for us to do a responsible job? And what happens when we no longer when we're no longer wealthy? When we no longer can just jump in in a four-wheel drive and go somewhere and carry some seeds? What happens when we're all desperate for something? Who's going to take care of the trees? So what we did was very controversial. It's no longer controversial because of what you're holding in your hand. Nobody can call me an eco-terrorist anymore, or what our group has done, eco-terrorism. You can check out our website. Just Google Torreya Guardians, Torreya, Torreya Guardians, and you can find out what we've done. Ever since this controversy began, basically with Paul Martin's in my paper in the Wild Earth, I have been keeping a web page with all the online available scholarly papers as well as news reports and blogs on the assisted migration debate. You can go through there, you can find them, and I've annotated it. I have a whole section on forestry that you can click on and look. You can go on there and you can see the history of how that's changed and the most amazing thing that's happened, and that I'm sure probably no one here has heard of, but what I want to let you know. Anyone who is a forester working in Canada is not a climate denier. Both in British Columbia and now in Ontario, they are doing assisted migration trials to try to discern how far they're going to have to move the seed stock. In British Columbia now, for about 5 or 6 years, whenever they have a logging operation, they do a lot of timber operations there, they never replant with British Columbia seed stock.
They come down into the US to get seed stock. Not knowing necessarily whether it's more southerly adapted here, but they can't afford to make wrong decisions. When you are in a timber business and you're planning for a 40 or 60 year cycle, you got to plan ahead. You got to look at what the scientists are saying, maybe the climate in British Columbia in 30, 40 years, and you have to plan for that. You stop arguing about it. They're quietly doing it, both the provincial government people and folks like Weyerhaeuser and so forth. You know white bark pine, how many of you have heard that white bark pine is severely in danger in Yellowstone, and what that then means for the grizzly bears and the others not getting their food? White bark pine, in human memory, has never lived in Alaska. British Columbia, in collaboration with Alaska, has planted plots of white bark pine in Alaska. They're planting regular mountain species from British Columbia up into the Yukon in the boreal zone to see how they're doing there. And for me, the scariest was when I read that they're taking these 17 species of trees, seed stock from British Columbia, and they're planting experimental plots in Northern California of British Columbia seed stock. Do you know why? Because they expect the climate of Northern California to reach them within 30 to 60 years. These are conservative people. These are foresters, you know. It's not, urban liberals. These are the foresters. And in Ontario, they're doing experiments there, particularly with their deciduous species, their nut species, that only go up into very southern Ontario. And they're taking seed stock from Tennessee, Kentucky, and Pennsylvania and testing them up in Ontario. Scientifically, experimentally. And Americans, USA Americans, haven't heard this. How could anyone hear this and not feel like I do? It's like, okay, this is real. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? When our group first formed Torreya Guardians, before we did our 2008 assisted migration from Florida to North Carolina, that Audubon magazine covered and had a photographer, and they wrote us up and everything. Very good article. Before that, Orion magazine, Michelle Nishwi of High Country News, as a freelancer, did interview me for Orion magazine and also Nature Conservancy people. And because she was interviewing me about Torreya taxifolia, how did I know? Why was I working so hard to move it? And then she asked me this question. She said, what does this mean for other tree species in climate change? And at the time I said, I don't even want to go there. I'm not even thinking, I am dealing with this one species. This is it. Don't ask me that. And I really didn't want to. I didn't really think. Ours stopped reproducing in the 1960s. Duh, it's time to move, And within the last couple years, 2013, an amazing paper came out in the Journal of Forestry on this issue. There is no doubt anymore in the forestry profession. It's just that we citizens aren't hearing about it. No one knows how to say it. No one knows what it means. The foresters want to maintain control. The scientists want to maintain control. You think they're going to be able to do it? You think we're going to keep funding them to do it? It may come to the time where citizens need to do what we do in Torreya Guardians. So when you're on that site, take a look. I'm the webmaster. We're trying to set the example for any group of activists. We have no money. Nobody pays us anything. It's all volunteer. There's no board. There's no nothing. There's nothing about this group other than personal relationships. And every time we get a new volunteer, I record the data, and I have people report on how their plants are doing, and I keep a photo essay that's called What We Are Learning, and I keep adding to that. And my hope is that for every species, someone will step forward in a group of people and act responsibly. We read all the scientific articles. I visited the species in California. There's a Torreya californica. I visited the species in California, and you know what? Every single one
of the isolated disjunct populations in California is a mountain species. Gee, maybe Torreya taxifolia, the Florida one, wants to be a southern Appalachian one too. So in closing this up, let me just mention that if you want to go further in this, you can look at the Torreya Guardians website, but there was a key paper that came out this fall that finally cleared us. I knew we were legal, but a lot of conservationists did not. And there was finally a paper published that cleared us as illegal, so I could do the first video blog and know that nobody could call me an eco-terrorist. So if you just Google on YouTube, helping plants move north in the Anthropocene, you can see a video. It's probably the easiest introduction to what our group has done and the controversy it's been. And it's going to come to you all in one form or another as well. So get prepared for that. While I'm on the Great March for Climate Action, what I'm doing, it's an extraordinary opportunity to do with, say, the strong program in natural history and now the Natural History Institute at Prescott College. There's something to be gained from breadth and experience. I've always known that, and my mentor Paul Martin, Justice Dan Jansen, Justice E.O. Wilson, I knew E.O. Wilson too. They say, I am a naturalist first and a scientist second. A naturalist first, a scientist second. And what they meant by that is that the historic guild of natural history, going out into the field and being open to seeing patterns and coming up with hypotheses that if all you do is reading papers and doing computer models, you're going to miss. We need natural historians. That's why I could do what I did with Torreya taxifolia. I had a breadth in there, and I had the depth of deep time. It's not ecology, it's evolutionary ecology. It's paleoecology. And so having that understanding of natural history is going to be absolutely vital.
Preach it.
It's going in, it's as I did in California, going in and looking and trying to feel, what does this species of genus Torreya, which has 3 other species in the world, it used to be circumpolar in the Oligocene, but there's 3 in East Asia. What does it want? Where does it want to go? And a lot of it is a Gestalt type thing. And then I go to the southern Appalachians, and I'm there and I'm sort of trying to feel the microclimates and the slope. And we're now recording associated species. It seems that if all we need to do is not have to do soil types and all this, but if we just chart where we're having the most success and look at the other plants that are naturally growing there, and we're doing it in wild forest, second, third, fourth growth forest, always private lands. Natural history is so important. I'm constantly in argument with some of these young graduate students who've done some narrow thing related to our species, and they just don't get it. They just don't get it. So I'm so glad Prescott is training young people to value field experience and a breadth of understanding of everything and an openness and being mentored by you folks, because you've got to be mentored to see the possibilities of doing it. About every month or so, I do another episode of a video blog series called Climate, Trees, and Legacy. And so along the route of the marchers, Michael and I are speaking in support of them to promote a better understanding of climate change and to try to get action moving ahead. And so what I'm also doing in every region we go through, I pick out a single species of tree and I try to discern lessons of it. Lessons from a broad perspective, so that by the time I get all the way across the country from west to east, I'll have a whole variety of different things where I ask questions and I have new lessons. And so what I'm going to be doing through Arizona and New Mexico, Alligator Juniper, not sure what lessons I'm going to discern there, but one thing that attracted me to this tree is, I have to admit, it's my favorite juniper. It's just my favorite.
And then there's a place you can go, if you just put in, if you Google these words, USFS for U.S. Forest Service, Moscow for the lab, forestry lab in Moscow, Idaho, Plant Profiles Climate. You can get to this awesome website that has 76 species of western trees. You click on it, and you can look at very detailed map of the western United States, where its current range is, and then click on 30 years from now, 60 years from now, 90 years from now. Alligator Juniper. Fortunately, in Arizona, you've got your tall mountains, and so it'll do okay, but in New Mexico, it's going to wink out, and the New Mexican genotypes are going to have to move north. Skip, there isn't anything in between, but they have to skip up to the Front Range of Denver, and they'll be doing fine there, but 30 years from now, they're going to have to move over to Idaho. That's where they're going to need to be, and 30 years after that, they have to be in British Columbia. Are they going to get there?
Yeah.
That's your beloved alligator juniper. Oh, one last question I want to ask. Who here has seen the 1980s, before we had digital stuff, animation of the classic French essay, The Man Who Planted Trees? Doug, are you the only one? Okay. It's on YouTube now.
The shepherd, who did not smoke, went to fetch a little sack, and onto the table he emptied a pile of acorns. He began to examine them very carefully, one by one, separating the good from the bad. I sat, smoking my pipe. I offered to help, but he told me it was his work, and indeed, seeing how very carefully he carried out his task, I did not insist. That was the only time we spoke.
I'm going to put that in one of my video blogs, probably for alligator juniper, because I'm going to put into this lesson for alligator juniper the importance of ceremony. I experienced that with the champion tree and people's relationship. It's not just science. It's a deep emotional bond. Go on YouTube and put in The Man Who Planted Trees, and or go on Wikipedia and click onto YouTube from there. There's some other ones. There's a book that came out that's on champion trees, but make sure you get to the 1980s, and Christopher Plummer narrates it, you know, the hero in Sound of Music. Oh my gosh. It's about 20 minutes, the entire thing. It won an Academy Award back whenever. You cannot watch that movie without bursting into tears. And it is, I think, the iconic thing to bring back. You know how myths can be updated and brought back? That is the video to show for what we need to step into as citizens as climate moves ahead. No matter what kind of mitigation, instantly, if we were to stop fossil fuels right now, instantly, if we were to stop forest fire burning, no more carbon dioxide going on, climate regimes, plant zones will still be heading north for a variety of reasons. This is going to be necessary no matter what. And it's a time to mourn, and it's a time to prepare the next generations to remember what it was like when both the environmentalists on one side thought nature could take care of itself, set aside wilderness areas, get the human influence out, nature will take care of itself, and industrialists on the other said, nature will take care of itself, and wipes out things. We're at a point now where it's really arguable whether nature can take care of itself. And unfortunately, because forest trees take on average 30 years generation time, and because they can't move, and some of them, the large seeded ones, have lost their seed dispersers. My genus Torreya has been around since the Jurassic. It's done just fine. It would go out on our watch here in the East if we weren't involved. This is the first time something intentionally has to get involved with this. It's the speed of climate change and what we have done for disrupting the ability of large seeded plants to be carried. Even if there weren't highways and towns and vast agricultural fields blocking forests from going north. All those things that we already know are problems. Now you add in the speed of change with climate change, the loss of dispersers, and there you have it. There is no Santa Claus. You guys ready for that? I mean, you know, can we handle it? How can we present this to the young people? I would not present this to kids. How do you present it to college students and you don't freak them out any more than they're already freaked out? How do you get them through an understanding? Is it possible to have a relationship with nature where you're not arrogant, where you're not gardening and going, ooh, I like this tree, but where you still have that wilderness respect for it, the wildness of the species? Is it possible to do that? That's what everybody's job is going to be. Because we're the generations that remember what it was like to think nature could take care of itself.